All right, welcome to Ames Public Library, virtually for Genealogy Plus, a program brought to you through partnership with Ames Public Library and the Story County Genealogical Society. This feels like a bit of a blast from the past. It's been a few months since we've done an all virtual program. Just so you are all aware, we'll ask that your microphones stay muted during the presentation and that you submit any questions via the chat function, which you should find a link to at the bottom of your screen. We will be monitoring the chat to make sure your questions get shared with their speaker when appropriate, and there will be time for questions at the end of the session. If you get bumped out of the meeting, just follow that original link back and you should get right back in. And I have enabled live captioning. So if you're not seeing captioning and would like to, you can turn that on by clicking the CC Live Transcript button in the Zoom menu bar and select Closed Captioning. Today's event is being recorded and will be posted to the Ames Public Library's YouTube channel after the event. And as I mentioned, we will have time for questions at the end. So if you're with us in person, we will make sure that your questions get read aloud. They'll just need to be put into the chat, I think. So with that, please welcome Teresa Lewer.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today and talk about DNA. Generally, if I'm doing this in person, I start taking a poll and ask people, how many have already tested, how many are gonna test, who you tested with. Well, that doesn't work well with the Zoom. So I'm going to obviously assume that you care about DNA, that many of you have already tested, but you might have some questions about why did I test and what is this stuff? And others you might are thinking about it. So we'll go through that and talk about the pros and cons. We'll take the questions at the end, and then depending on how long we go, or if you guys want to stick around, I can always do some examples as we go through there. I gave Megan a handout that just has some general information and some resources and some, what am I trying to say? Some terminology, but this is not a biology class. So we're going to have to talk a little bit about that, but it's not all that necessary that you absorb that part of it. A couple terms you do need to know because you're like, well, what does that mean? But we'll get there, and we'll start. It'll be fun. And I'm glad to do this because I just get fascinated by the DNA as we go through there. So let's start off here. Okay, what's going on here? There we go. Okay, today what we're going to concentrate is what are we testing? I mean, we talk about DNA, but there are some different kinds of things within the DNA we're testing. Who do we test with? And that's always a big question for people who haven't tested is, well, who should I test with? What do those results mean? And then what can we do with them? It's kind of you can go as deep as you want to and as shallow as you want to in terms of playing with your results, okay? But first, privacy concerns, okay? People talk about this a lot. Can insurance companies access my DNA records? Absolutely not. There's a federal law that says they cannot. What about law enforcement access? And that did make some headlines there. There are differences among the testing sites. Ancestry does not participate with law enforcement access. You must use their test kits, and very few criminals probably step up and say, oh yeah, let's do this. The other ones they make you opt in to participate in law enforcement access. The default is that you do not participate. Now, I've managed quite a few kits, and I have some at Family Tree DNA, and then I have transferred them over to GEDmatch. And so I have very carefully opted out for all of my family that I'm responsible for their kits, but I've left mine in, which means if mine's in, theirs is in. So I'm going to tell you that your DNA, if anybody in your family has tested, is out there already. So that's not an issue. But and then once you test with a company, they have privacy settings. So with Ancestry, you can go in and say, I don't want to share I don't want my DNA shared with anybody, which means you don't see any matches. And you might leave it open for a while and then shut it off and say, I don't want to do that. But one of the things that you need to understand on privacy concerns is you may find surprise relatives, cousins and half siblings that show up. And so you need to be, this is not for the faint of heart. I have heard it said that DNA is the death of the family secret. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you're uncomfortable with this, this is not a thing to be doing. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to talk about, I gave you this in most of these on that sheet of paper. The first one that you really need to understand, or at least be familiar what it means, is that we abbreviate it CM, centimorgan, and that's a unit of measure. And the more centimorgans you have in common with someone, the closer your relationship. So we will, there's some schedules out there that say, well, if you have X amount of centimorgans in common with somebody, you are probably a first cousin or a second cousin or a first cousin once removed. So we kind of go through that. You'll see sometimes the phrase MRCA, which is the most recent common ancestor. So obviously you and your siblings, your most recent common ancestor are your parents. For your first cousins, your most recent common ancestor are your grandparents. And then we just kind of work our way that. We're going to talk a little bit later about shared matches or in common with, which is with Ancestry and Family Tree DNA. These are persons who appear on both your match list and someone else's. And that's how we start building out a tree as we go through there. You'll see a phrase sometimes, which is NPE, which is a non-paternal event, or sometimes it's called an MPE, misattributed paternal event, where the genetic father is not the documented father. So, sometimes that comes as a shock to people that the man they thought was their father is biological father, is not their biological father. So we go from there. People talk about the haplotype. I don't really, well, haplotype is a cluster of genes on a specific part and a chromosome that tend to be sticky. They tend to stay together and they are inherited together. And that way, this sequence of these genes is survived through many generations. So that's how we kind of identify a group. And the haplogroup is a group of people who share a common ancestor a long time ago. We're talking early, thousands of years ago, either on their paternal Y chromosome or the maternal line. And it can give you some deep ancestral origins. So I have a maternal haplogroup of H, which is the most common female haplogroup in Western Europe. All right. My brother has a haplogroup on his Y, and it's R, which is, again, the most common one in Western Europe. So they are all assigned letters. A is the oldest one, which is in Africa. All haplogroups originate in, well, the human race had originated in Africa, East Africa, and it has come out. So haplogroup A and B are specific to Africa. And then as time goes on, every time you have a mutation and there's a major change, then we get a new haplogroup, they get a new number, they get a new letter as we go through there. Okay. Pedigree collapse. And all of us may have run into that at point. It's instances where related persons, like a first or second cousins, marry and have children. Okay. Or two sisters marry two brothers, that kind of thing. You can identify that, but it causes the top of your family tree to narrow. As somebody once says, my family tree is not a tree, it's a bush. It failed to expand as you go out there. And we see that, okay? It happens once in a while in a lot of people's family trees. The problem with that is that all of a sudden you've kind of doubled up the DNA. And so you haven't brought new DNA, you've kept the DNA, and so you can show up as a closer relative than you really are because you've got DNA from both sides as we go through that. And then endogamy, that is, I call it pedigree collapse on steroids. That's where the practice of marrying within a specific social group, ethnic group, so the Amish, the Mennonites, Judaism, certain island cultures, quite frankly, if they are geographically isolated, then obviously they're going to be marrying within, not necessarily cousins, but distant, not close cousins, but distant cousins. And so that's where you all of a sudden, your DNA becomes very dense, and it's very difficult to identify how far or how distant those relatives are that you're finding matches with. And quite frankly, I talk about my Irish ancestors, and I've got one that's from a parish in County Tipperary, and everybody there is a Gleason. And I know they've intermarried, and my problem is I'm having difficulty deciding how I'm related to all these matches, because who knows what they've done to me. But that's endogamy, okay? No, so those are the terms. The one that you really care about the most is the centimorgans, the CMs, because that does tell you how closely you're related. But now we're going to do a little biology here. It's like, what exactly are we testing when we submit our sample to a testing company? Okay, so this, we've all seen this. This is the DNA. It's a double helix. You've got 2 strands as you go through there. And basically, our DNA is made up of just 4 things: a sugar molecule, a phosphate molecule, and a nitrogen base. And they are abbreviated ATCG. All right. And the interesting thing is they are complementary. If you have an A on one side, you're going to have a T on the other. If you're going to have a C on one side, there's a G on the other. But our DNA is all different depending on how these pairs are distributed on a DNA helix. So but we have millions of these nucleotides, these AGCT, on a chromosome. And so we have a lot of opportunity to have some mistakes made or some changes made as you go through there. But that's the DNA double helix that we're talking about. Now, within our cell, we have 2 places where there's DNA that we can work with. One is the nuclear DNA that's in the nucleus. That's kind of obvious. And that's the 23 chromosomes that we always talk about. And you see them. I always love this. They actually can take photos of them with high-powered whatever. And they always arrange them in size. So chromosome 1 is the largest. And then we get down to chromosome 22 is the smallest. And then 23 is the sex ones. We'll talk about sex later on, okay? So that's the DNA that's inside the nucleus. Outside the nucleus, you have mitochondrial DNA. It's a very short string of DNA that is generally almost always inherited from the mother. And we'll go for that. So we can test our nuclear DNA and we can test our mitochondrial DNA, okay? Now, so here's our 23 pairs of chromosomes. Those I did and the X and Y I put in red down there in the corner. And then there's the mitochondrial DNA, which is not a chromosome. It's just DNA floating out there in our cells as we go through there. But I always think these are kind of interesting pictures as we go through that, okay? Now, let's talk about that 23rd pair. It's the chromosome that can determine your biological sex. And I always feel like I'm teaching a junior high biology class when a man and a woman really love each other, that type thing, okay? But your 23rd pair could be an X or could be a Y. Women have 2 X chromosomes. Men have an X and a Y chromosome. And anytime a child is conceived, they get half of, because these are pairs, they get 1/2. They get 1/2 of the pairs. They get one of the 2 sides. So each parent gives 1 chromosome on the 23rd to a child. So a mother can only give an X because that's all she's got. A father can give either his X or Y to this newborn child, okay? If the father gives an X and the mother gives an X, then it's a girl. We've got two X's. If the father gives a Y, it's a boy because he's given the Y and mom's given the X. So we have an XY as we go through there. So father really determines the sex of the child. So Henry VIII, when he couldn't get those boys, you know, seriously shedding wives, it was really Henry's fault, but we can go from there. That's it. So that's the 23rd pair. We have the first 22, and then the 23rd pair is the what we call the sex chromosomes, X and Y. Okay. Now, so the X chromosome is passed from father to son to son to son. All right. So here's our little example. We've got the ones in yellow and blue. So we start out with a great grandfather, and he passes his on to his two sons, but he's got a daughter. So she does not get a Y chromosome because, you know, she's a girl, so she has no Y. So great grandfather's passed it on to two sons. All right. The son in the middle only has girls, so he doesn't pass his Y chromosome on to there, but the son on the far left passes his on to two sons, and they in turn pass it on to two sons. So when we test the Y chromosome, what we're doing is we are testing an unbroken male line. So I can't test a Y chromosome. And generally we say that follows the surname. Now that's not always true, but I can't test my Y chromosome, but I have a brother. Okay. So I got my brother to do it. And so his Y chromosome is my father's Y chromosome is my paternal great grandfather's, is, you know, and then my paternal grandfather's father, and all the way down. That Y chromosome has been passed down generation after generation after generation. Maybe some mutations in there, but that's what we're looking for. So that's the Y chromosome, and we can't test that. We'll talk about who tests it for us if you want to try to work out the paternal line. And what it does, it creates a haplogroup, which I talked about. They trace their paternal line back to a single ancestor who lived in a specific location. In my family's case, it's R, and that is in Western European. So my brother is R1B1, and then some other numbers as we go through that, because you can subdivide these haplogroups, and that's where your eyes start to roll, and that's for people who are really into this. Most people don't need to care as we get going to there. Okay, so why DNA testing? You test markers, and markers are specific spots on the Y chromosome. It used to be you could test Y, 12 markers. They don't offer that anymore because you get so many matches that really aren't valid, because everybody happens to have very similar, not everybody, but anybody within, let's say, the R haplogroup has all the same markers on, many of the same markers on the 12. So that's not worth it. 37 markers, they test 37 places on your Y chromosome. Unless you have a very common name like Smith, you really should start with this. If you get a close match with somebody that has the same name, you've got a relationship. All right. If you have, if your name is Smith, then you might have some, I should say this. If you're going to get a close match with somebody with the same name, so if my husband were to test and he were to get a match with somebody by the name of Lewer, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We know that they are a relative. 67 markers. Now, they don't have that as a standalone test anymore, but they did at one time. I had my brother test 67. Then we get into the 111 markers. That's really more expensive and not particularly helpful for most people. The 37 markers can probably get you. And then they have what they call the big Y, which is really expensive. And that's not something that you want to talk out, invest in it. So who tests this Y? Family tree DNA is basically the only one that you're going to be able to go to. And it is more expensive to have these tested than it is to go to the ancestry, autosomal test, so we go from there. But if you really want to see if you can find out your Y, how your male line goes, you can do it. All right. Now here's my brother's. Okay. He's the first one there. And these are my closest relatives that he can go. So he tested 67. These other people named Bryant and Kelly, both good Irish names, have tested, and they match all the way across, except for the one spot, which is the marker 389/1. And so there's been a mutation somewhere along there. My brother's value on that is 12, and theirs is 11. So we're probably related, but you notice they don't share the same last name. But over generations, you know, things happen. We have non-paternal events. We have adoptions. We have remarriages where people take on the name. So we got Bryant's and Kelly's and McCormick's that are close, but not quite as we go through there. Okay. And then I put my brother into a Y-DNA for an Irish group. And again, he does not have an exact match anywhere along the line. So he can come close, but he's just got some, that 389 just seems to be a little odd for him. And I got my brother to test, and then I got my first cousin to test, who's a son of my uncle. So they should have the same Y chromosome. Came from their fathers, who came from our grandfather, and so forth and so on. And it's off by one marker. They don't match exactly. There's one marker that's off. So there's been mutation in there. So I have other male cousins that come from yet another uncle. I mean, I could ask one of them to test, I suppose, and then I could see if they match my brother or if they match that first male cousin that tested. Because obviously there's a mutation somewhere. And you know, I want my brother to be the mutant really, really bad. So, but I have never asked these cousins, because I figure two's enough and we just quit as we go through there. Okay. So that's the Y chromosome. That's the paternal line. All right. Now the mitochondrial DNA, we talked about that. So the Y is the sex, that 23rd sex chromosome. The mitochondrial is in, it's not part of the 23 pairs. It's the one that's outside the nucleus. And it really can determine age and origins of mitochondrial DNA. Again, these are people who can trace their maternal line back to a single ancestor. So my mitochondrial came from my mother, and then from her mother and her mother and her mother. Again, they are assigned groups A through X, and H is the most common group in Urim, and that's what I have. I have a haplogroup H as we go through there. Okay, so the interesting thing is it follows all children inherit their mother's mitochondrial DNA, but only women can pass it on. So on the far right, you see this woman, great-grandmother. She passed it on to her daughter, who passed it on to her daughter, who passed it on to her daughter. Okay, on the middle one, the woman circled in yellow had, you know, hers, and she passed it on to her son. So all the children inherit it, but only women can pass it on. So the woman circled in yellow passed hers on to her son, but he can't pass it on. It's just, it doesn't happen that way. It comes from the mother's line. So he can test his mitochondrial DNA to test his mother's side, but the other way. Then we get over the people in purple. The woman hands it off to her daughter, who hands it off to her son. And again, it disappears all the way through there. We can't, the male line ends the mitochondrial DNA. So it comes down the paternal line. A man has his mother's, but he cannot pass it on to any of his children. So the problem with this, DNA mutates very slowly on the mitochondrial DNA, as opposed to the Y. So that common female ancestor that you might have, and you have your mitochondrial DNA and you've tested and you are getting matches, your most common recent ancestress could have lived very recently or as much as several thousand years ago. So it becomes a problem. It's not something that I suggest that you test. I have done it because I just was really curious. But for genealogy purposes, it's not necessarily going to help you as you go through. But as an example of how this works, mitochondrial DNA mutates slowly, and it survives better when you all of a sudden you dig up somebody. And so the example of this is Richard III. I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago, they were digging a parking lot in England, and they kind of always knew that probably there'd been a church there in the 1400s, but it had been so long. And they dug up a skeleton. And based on some other clues, they thought, this might be Richard III. We think Richard III might be it. So they were able to retrieve DNA, and they retrieved mitochondrial DNA. Now, obviously, first, he didn't have any sons. He didn't have any children, but also he couldn't pass it on. But he had a sister who married into the royal line. And when you marry into the royal line, you got a lot of documentation. So they were able to follow the sister's female descendants down to current days because it was well documented. And so they found two people. One was a woman, and the other was a man whose mother had been a direct female descendant of this. And they tested both their mitochondrial DNAs, and they compared it to the skeleton, the DNA of the skeleton that they found. And wouldn't you know, they're an exact match. So pretty much, the preponderance of evidence is that was Richard III that they dug up. But the mitochondrial DNA does survive in poor conditions with a skeleton in terms of water and all sorts of things, where the Y chromosome is just a little more fragile. I hope you guys don't feel bad that I'm telling you you're fragile, but you are a little bit. And again, Family Tree DNA does the full mitochondrial DNA. Other companies will do a smaller section and tell you what your haplogroup probably is, but it's not the full mitochondrial DNA. But again, this can be a little expensive, and I'm not suggesting that you do this. It's just, you might see references to it. Okay, so here's my mitochondrial DNA. If you notice, it says genetic existence, which is 0. That means their mitochondrial DNA and my mitochondrial DNA match exactly. I have no idea who these people are. They show their female lines. I don't have it. I have no idea who that person is. And obviously we're related, but it could be somebody from the year 1122 AD, and my genealogy isn't that good. I'm not going back that far. Okay, so here's your family tree. The male line comes down. This is my brother. So he gets his male line, all the red circles coming down from my dad, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather. And then he also has my mother's side of the mitochondrial DNA as we come through there. Now, he cannot pass on that mitochondrial DNA to his children, but he does have a son, and Hunter's got his Y chromosome from his daddy. So we go from there, okay? So we've talked about Y, and we've talked about mitochondrial. What most of you are doing is through Ancestry or Family Tree DNA or 23andMe, you are doing the autosomal chromosomes. Those are the ones 1 through 22, all right? They call autosomes. And that's what they're testing is on this, okay? And let you connect to the greater family tree, because remember, if it has to be the direct male line or the direct female line, we are eliminating all those people in the middle. We aren't testing for them, but they have shared DNA with us. So the autosomal allows us to fill in these gaps that take advantage of these people here. Okay, so it tests 95% of the genetic material that's not on that Y chromosome or X chromosome or the mitochondrial. So that's what you're doing if you've tested with Ancestry or any of the other ones. Okay. Now this is where it gets exciting. you are a mix of all your ancestors' autosomal DNA. And sometimes we have difficulty wrapping our head around how this really works, okay? So here's me, and I've got a little of my grandmas and a little of my grandpas on both sides, and they pass it on to, well, let's say grandma and grandpa pass it on to mom, and grandma and grandpa pass it on to dad. And then I get some of my moms, or most of my moms, but in smaller segments as we go through there. And this just only shows, going up to my grandparents, my grandmother really had a mixture from her parents, and it gets to be a little exciting. But you are a mix of all those people that came before you to a certain extent, all right? So how much of your ancestors' DNA do you share? You should have 50% of your dads and 50% of your mothers. Now there's a little rounding as we go through. It might be 49.6 and 51.4. So you should have half of your fathers, half of your mothers. And then for each of your grandparents, you have 25% of theirs, and we're having this. And then your great grandparents, you get 12.5%. And then your great greats, you get 6% of theirs. And as time goes on, when you get back to about the 5th generation, you start losing some of the DNA. You might have 3rd great grandparents that you have none of their DNA has been passed on to you, because we've sliced and diced it so often and it just didn't come down to you. So that's why they say that going beyond the 5th generation is very, very difficult. They can't be. 4th generation, yeah, you're doing fine. 4th cousins. You get into the 5th ones, we're in trouble. We've lost it. You can know you're related, but you don't know how. Okay. So those are the 3 things that you can test. You can test the Y, the mitochondrial, and then the most common ones that we are testing is the autosomal. So who do we test with? Now, I have given a handout to Megan, and she's done it. So I kind of went through the testing companies, because everybody is like, well, who should I test with if I haven't tested already? So I give Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, and Living DNA. Those are the 5 that most genealogists use. If you notice, there's a large range in terms of the database size. Ancestry has 20 million kits in their database, that people who have done this. 23andMe, it's down to 12, MyHeritage 5, Family Tree DNA is smaller, and Living DNA is very small. Now, if you're looking to make a match, which one do you think you're more likely to find people in? Well, obviously Ancestry. Ancestry is the big dog in this, and you are more likely to find that distant relative that matches with you, okay? So oftentimes I tell people to start with Ancestry, and then there's some things we can do after that point, all right? Now, the next thing is, how do they collect the sample? So Ancestry and 23andMe, they give you a little tube and you spit in it. And I tell you, as soon as you go to do that, your mouth turns into the Sahara Desert. You're like, I am never going to get enough saliva in that little tube. I mean, it's not a lot, but it's just psychological as you go through there. MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, and Living DNA give you cheek swabs, kind of long Q-tips to do that with. I got my 100-year-old aunt to test, and there was no way I was going to ask her to do the saliva tube. So I had her test with Family Tree DNA and did the cheek swab. All right. I really wish I could have had her do the Ancestry, because I would have gotten, more chances of matches with hers. But I just did that. Okay. The key is, when we get down to the 4th thing, do they accept transfers? And we will talk about that. But you could test with Family Tree, with Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, Living DNA. But if you test with Ancestry, you can download your results and transfer them over to these other places. So that's why I suggest, if you're going to do this, you start with Ancestry, because they don't accept transfers from other people, but they can do their own. Test with Ancestry, download their results, and then upload them to some of these other sites, including there's another one called GEDmatch. So you're kind of getting two deals in one situation. You have to pay a little bit to upload it to MyHeritage or Family Tree DNA, but it's not the same cost as if you testing with them as you go through there. One of the things you're like, does it link to a family tree? Because that's kind of important, because you get a match, you would like to look at that person's tree. Well, Ancestry and MyHeritage and Family Tree DNA allow you to put a tree online. 23andMe and Living DNA do not, but they kind of create a genetic, well, 23andMe creates a genetic tree for you. And then you can add into it if you want. Whereas Living DNA supposedly is doing that, but they're still working on it. They're not there yet. We're having trouble with that, okay? So what do they test? Everybody tests that autosomal DNA. Okay, that's the one, that the standard that everybody uses. The Y chromosome, you pretty much have to go to Family Tree DNA, and the mitochondrial that you have to go. The autosomal test cost ranges from $99 to $79, all right, plus shipping and handling, okay? The interesting thing is, if you are an Amazon Prime member, you can buy your Ancestry test kit through them. And as a Prime member, you don't have shipping and handling. And that runs between $10 and $13. So that's worth saving $10, $13 as we go through there. Okay. The Y test for the 37 markers is $119. The mitochondrial test is $159. So like I said, that's an expensive test, and it's not going to help you a whole lot with your genealogy. Some special things they do now. 23andMe really does a strong job in maybe identifying some potential health issues. They got their hands slapped by the FDA, because when they first started out, they just told you. And, and now they're like, no, we give you, this might be an issue and you should talk to people and everything else. It doesn't mean that you're going to get breast cancer, but you might want to look at something. MyHeritage, it was an Israeli company. I think it's been bought since then, but they have a lot of people in Europe have tested with MyHeritage. So if you're looking for your European ancestors, that might be you might want to get either test directly with them or transfer your test results from Ancestry to them to see if you can find it. Family Tree DNA, their specialty is the fact they do all these other tests. And then Living DNA is a very small one, but their specialty is the British Isles. So if you've got English and Scottish, kind of Irish, but not so much, that might be something you want to do. Now, if you transfer to Family Tree DNA and to MyHeritage, they charge you, I think, like $20 to be able to go in and see all of the reports that you can possibly get. You can get basics, but you go from there. With Family Tree DNA, you can test your autosomal, and then at some point decide you want to have, it's your brother and you want to have his Y DNA tested. And they will use the original sample if it's still valid, and type it, and you get a little bit of a break on the pricing sometimes. But the one thing to remember is there's always a sale. It's kind of like Yonkers used to be. There was a sale for Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, that stopped on Monday. But one of them has something for Black History Month. Father's Day, Mother's Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas, April 25th, which is the National DNA Day. And I finally looked to see why that is. And that's because that was when the first paper on DNA was actually published. And then for some reason, August, and I suppose it's because they haven't had a test for a while. They just at random times have it. So my suggestion, and they always are like at least $20 and maybe $40 cheaper. So just keep checking on it and around those time periods. And don't pay full price. There's no reason to pay full price unless you've got some urgency involved in it. Just your next go around will be April, and then in May there'll be some more. Oh, it's St. Patrick's Day. Sometimes one of them has something on St. Patrick's Day. any reason for a sale. That's the main thing as we go through there. Okay. So we've tested. What do our results mean? And I'm going to talk about the autosomal, which is the one that most of you have done. All right. First thing they do, and this is what an awful lot of people test that are not interested in genealogy, they want to know what their ethnicity estimate is. And it's called, that's another, technically it's called the admixture. And if you watch Finding Your Roots, you'll see they talk about that every once in a while. Now, the estimates are extremely accurate when they do continents. Are you Asian? Are you European? When they start to burrow down into modern countries, German versus Swedish or German versus Swiss, they become a little more iffy as you go through there. The goal is to figure out where your DNA was found 500 or 1,000 years ago. Well, you know, we're not that interested in that. I mean, it would be interesting. As genealogists, that's interesting, but that's not helping me further my genealogical research as we go through there. But what they do is they go out to the old country and they ask people if they would test if these people can reasonably assert all 4 grandparents were born in a specific area, such as a county in Ireland or a village in Germany. And that becomes their reference panel. All right. Now, that's going to become more difficult because people, you know, having 4 grandparents that were born in a county in Ireland is one thing. But as younger people are tested, their grandparents may have all lived in Dublin, but their great-grandparents came from 4 different counties. So we have some issues. So they're trying to get this done as much as possible. The key is oftentimes a company is very strong testing in Germany, let's say, but they don't test much in Ireland. Well, then when they compare your DNA to their reference panels, they're going to show as much Irish because they don't have many people from Ireland that they're using in their reference panels. So you can get some unusual results from between different testing companies, and I'll show you that as we go through there. Okay. So here's my estimate on Ancestry. Now they're getting to be very, very good. They say I'm 46% Irish, and now they are burrowing down to very specific places in Ireland. Now, the Munster, which is North Tipperary, I got that documented up one side, down the other. My McCormicks and my Howes are from the northern part of Tipperary. I know that. They have Connacht, which Munster and Connacht are just regions of Ireland. It's kind of like you're saying you're from New England or the Midwest. But they tell me I have people from Northeast Mayo, and that's my Barrett family. I know that. Then they tell me I have people from North Leitrim and East Sligo, and I'm like, I don't know, but I have Irish ancestors that I don't know where they came from. But this gives me a great clue of maybe where I want to spend some time. So I'm 46% Irish, 27% English and Northwestern European, and that's my German, and I have a Swiss family. 20% Scottish, a little Norway, and a little Wales. Now, they'll tell you these are averages. So for Wales, it's from 0 to 6%. And I think I'm mostly on the 0 side. I just don't think I have a lot of Welsh ancestry. The Norwegian, we always laugh about that. That's the Vikings that went roaming and ended up in Ireland and left some DNA behind. I'm not sure that's true or not, but again, we've got that. They could have come down to my German ancestors as well. So that's my ancestry DNA, ethnicity estimate. Family tree DNA says I'm 16% Irish as opposed to 46% Irish. Well, my paper trail, I know I'm Irish. I mean, I've found where those families were born in Ireland. And then they give me 72% English, Scottish, and Welsh. Now, what's happened is I think family tree DNA has not tested a lot of people in Ireland, and therefore I can't match to those people. And therefore it's skewed the wrong direction. And then my Scandinavian's a little high, and my Baltic, I'm like, really? Okay, it's less than 1%. So this is some of them are better than others as we go through there. Okay. This is mine, and this is my sister's. Okay. I'm 46%, she's 45%. That's pretty close. She does not have any of that North Tipperary in her match, which is kind of odd, but she has the other two as we go through there. She's a little more English than I am. She's exactly the same Scottish. She's got 3% Wales, and she doesn't have any Norwegian as we go through there. Why wouldn't my sisters and mine be exactly the same? Well, you and your siblings are never going to be identical unless you are identical twins, all right? And that's because of a thing called recombination. And remember, we've got our chromosomes are really two strands. They're a pair as you go through there. And they break and rejoin. So when an egg is created, so when our mother's eggs were created, and those were all done at her birth, each of her 23 pairs went through recombination. So each one of the eggs in my mother's womb were slightly different from the egg next to it because that recombination took place in different spots. And the same thing when a sperm is created. The 22 chromosomes, we don't do the Y and the X, but the 23 pairs go through recombination. And it can be at different points on the chromosomes every time. Then I get half my mother's and half my father's. And so therefore, I don't get the same exact things that my family, my sisters got, or obviously my brother, but some of them. So the second child gets different halves because of that. So this ensures genetic diversity. If we didn't do recombination, we would all be identical to each other. And that's not good. Genetic diversity lets the human race survive as we go through there. So we kind of from that. So here, this is a simple example. Dad is Japanese, so he's 100% blue. Mom's got Eastern, Southern European, British, Scandinavian, and French on hers. And then all of a sudden, when the children are conceived, child 1 on chromosome 1 got most of his dad's, but a little bit of his mother's. Child chromosome 2, 3, 4. So you can just see how that works. And the child 1 and child 2 are not identical. And that's what happens. That's good. We want to have recombination. All right. Certain parts, I think, of our genes are what I call are sticky, and they stay together, but other ones not so much. All right. So I'm going to use Ancestry as my example because probably the odds are that most of you that have tested with Ancestry. I do have some other examples as we go through here because we have my ethnicity, we have my matches, and we have my through lines, okay? So we're going to talk about what do we do with these results. We got this email that said, hey, go online, you can see what you've got. All right. Well, we know we can look at our ethnicity results, but what else as genealogists can we make happen as we go through here? So we use matches. We want to look and see how closely related we are. We use shared matches on Ancestry or in common with on Family Tree DNA. And I can't remember what MyHeritage calls it. I should remember. It narrows it down how we're related. And then we can use a search tool to find matches with specific names or places in their trees. All right. So how reliable are these predictions of how closely you're related? Unless you have endogamy, or you've had a pedigree collapse, it's very reliable through the 3rd or 4th cousins. Then after a 5th cousin to 10th cousin, they know you're related, but they can't tell you how closely related you are because you just don't share as much DNA. So we have to take some of this with a grain of salt as we go through there. Now, one of the things I gave you in the handout is a link to, it's called DNApainter.com. And this is what they call the shared centimorgan tool. And there's different things you can do, but a fellow by the name of Blaine Bettinger has been asking people to share the results of how much DNA they share with a known person, your parent, your siblings, and so forth and so on. And you get ranges. Okay, for a parent, The average is 3,485 centimorgans, but it can range from 23,000 to 2,300 to 3,700. For your siblings, the average is 2,600, but it could range from 16 to 34, 1,600 to 34. Your child, grandchild, and so forth. So when you get a match, you can go to this shared DNA tool and look to see really what the range is. And there's some other things you can do with it. Ancestry, if you look at it and you click on the little I next to your how many centimorgans you have, it will tell you the probabilities of your first cousin once removed. Because you notice a first cousin, the average is 866, but the range is from 396 to 1300. And that also includes your second cousin, because they go from 41 to 592. So there's a chance that that's a second cousin, but they'll give you the odds of how is it a first cousin, is a second cousin, a first cousin once removed. You know, I never used to pay attention to whether it was a first cousin or once removed, twice removed. You know, I didn't really care. I just knew we were related. Well, now I do care. So now I have a tendency to have to diagram these things out to figure out how we're related. And that's a whole thing we could go into. There are places that help you figure out how you're related. Okay. So here's my DNA matches. Okay. My sister and I share 2,719 centimorgans. That's, you know, about half as we go through there. My niece, I share 1,800. A nephew, I share 1,700 as we go through there. Okay. So that, you know, that's a lot of centimorgans. I always say that we have about 7,000 centimorgans. I'm just going to say you have 7,000. So then we start working our way back. We should have 3,500 from our parents, and then go down and go down as we come from there. So these are my close families that they tell me about. Okay. Now these are more distant matches. This is a third to fourth cousin. I have 73 centimorgans, 71. Ancestry gives it to you based on the most you have as you go through there. 64, 62. Then they tell you if there's a tree. And one of the things I'm encourage you is, if you do test, is to put a tree on Ancestry or any of the other ones if you can. You do not have to pay to put it. You don't have to have a subscription to Ancestry to put your tree on. But I really think you need to put your tree on there, because that helps other people figure out how you're related. So that first one I happen to know is Corin Andrews, and he's got a tree. And so I was able to go, oh yeah, that's on my mom's side, and so forth and so on. And I've made notes as we go through down on there. The third one, my match, I'm pretty sure it's on the Eggers side, but I'm not exactly sure because they don't have a tree. And so I'm in trouble on that one. So, these are the more distant matches. And then we get into some other really ones that are very, very done. So let's say I went in and I saw somebody back here that I was interested in. So I click on their name and I get a screen that looks like this. And what it does is it gives me kind of their tree. You can expand it. I can't see the full tree unless I have a subscription to Ancestry, but you can at least see part of it. And then I'm like, I still don't know how I am related to this person. So I go and I click on shared matches, all right? And what that does, it says you and Susie Q also have matches with these people. And that lets me figure out what I'm going to do with it. So if I come through here, and I don't know if that shows up, and here's my shared matches with that person. And oh, it's the Meyer-Rombeck family. It's the Meyer-Rombeck family, the Meyer-Rombeck family. Those people also share DNA with Susie Q. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. And then I have somebody down at the bottom with an unlinked tree. Well, what I figured out, it is my maternal grandmother's mother's side, the Barretts. And so, and then if I go back, I notice that they have, this person has somebody called Margherita Barretto. And I'm like, Italian? No, that's the Latin. Somebody, when they were baptized, the priest tried to Latinize the name and made it Barretto instead of Barrett. So that's the problem. So all of a sudden, no, I know that this person is descended from Margaret Barrett, and I have Barretts in my tree. And so I'm looking at their tree. I'm thinking, all right, how's this work? Well, it turns out Margaret and William had a son, Almond Joseph. How would you like to have a first name Almond? Almond Joseph Cook, who was born in Scotland. I'm like, but Margaret Barrett, if I go back far enough and do some research, was born in Ireland. I'm like, that's my Barretts. That's my Barretts from County Mayo. Now I just have to do it. So what you may end up having to do is, if they have a tree that's online and it's a very abbreviated tree, you may have to do the research for them and fill out their, kind of make out a tree for them to figure out how you can possibly be related. I was just talking to somebody last night on our Irish interest group, and she got a DNA match, and she said she looked at their tree and she's looking for Rogers is what the name of, and it's not there. But she noticed that somebody was born from County Armagh, a recent person in the tree. So she went back, and she went back 2 more generations, and she found where this fellow Rafferty was married to a Rogers, and then they're from the same area in Ireland where her family's is. So she had to work it. We don't get all this on a silver platter sometimes. We have to do our research. And so sometimes you connect with people, sometimes you don't, all right? But that's what the shared matches is all about. I was able to identify how that woman is related to me by using other people that she's related to that I know, okay? You can search matches. So if you go over here, here's my matches. I go over here on the far right side and it says search. Now I can put a surname in a match tree. So I can put in, I'm looking for people by the name of Haddon. And so I can search under that to see if anybody has the name Haddon in their tree. Now the problem is, if they don't have a tree, it's not going to show up. That's an issue for me. Or I can put a birth location in there. And I can do somebody that has County Mayo in their match tree, in their tree. And so I get, the first one is managed by Barb Scanlon. I happen to know Barb Scanlon, and we're related, but look at that tree she's got. She's got 40,000 people in that tree. Barb's got to get a life. I don't understand that. But we are related, but we are not related through anybody in County Mayo. We are related from a family out of Tipperary. And then this other fellow, he actually lives in Ireland. He looks like a very jolly fellow. We have 27 Swinner Morgans, and he has a public tree. And I can't figure out how Joe and I are related. It just doesn't work. And I don't have shared matches. But I can search. I can search by name. I can search by place in my matches and see what happens if they have a tree, okay? When you're in your DNA, up in the corner, it says settings, all right? And I haven't updated it. They have just totally changed, Ancestry has totally changed their screens. So I'm like, oh Lord, and they just did that within I haven't figured it out the last week or 2 for me. But if you go up and you're in DNA and you choose your settings, all right, then you can do a couple things. One is, if you don't have a tree already on there, you can start a tree. You can upload a tree if you use software, or you can just manually enter it as you go through there, okay? And so I can start a tree. Once I have a tree in there, then I need to link that tree. And this is what it says, link to a family tree. So I'm going to link it to a tree. Now I have linked mine. Up here it says this test, my DNA test, is linked to the McCormick Haddon family tree, all right? And I can link it to you can only link to one tree at a time, but I could change it to the Gleason family tree or so forth and so on. This answers a question about when I do my tree, should I have a tree from my mother's side and a separate tree from my father's side? When you're doing DNA on Ancestry, that's an issue because you can only link to your father's side or link to your mother's side. You can't link to both trees at the same time. So I have a tree, I have a combined tree that has both my father and my mother's side on it as we go through there. Okay, so you need to link, you need to have a tree on Ancestry. You do that for free, and then you can link your DNA to it. Because so it says create and manage. You can upload a GEDCOM if you want to do it that way. That's a whole different, class on how to do GEDCOMs. Mary Laura can teach you how to do GEDCOMs and then upload it, your data, your tree from one to the other. Okay, you notice I got several trees on there. People have given me access to the trees, and I don't even know who some of those people are. But I'm like, okay, that's nice, but I'm not, we go from there. So on Ancestry, they also have a thing called through lines, and you have to have a tree that's linked to your DNA. And what they're trying to do is show you how things work. So you have your parents, then you have your 4 grandparents, you have your 8 great-grandparents, your 16 great-greats, and you come on down. So this is my tree as we go through there. I need to put some pictures on one of these days. Okay. So I get down here and I have Anna Adelaide Adelhart. How's that for a name? Trent Weber. Her last name is Trent Weber. She's my 2nd great-grandmother. God love her. She lived to be 97 years old. And I was fortunate enough, she died in Missouri, and those death records are online, and it gave me her parents' names in Germany and all sorts of information. And I was able to take off and go. But so there's she's the little old lady sitting in the middle of that picture, okay, with her various brothers or children as you go through there. But if I were to click on Anna Adelaide Adelhart Trent Weber, that's a mouthful, in through lines, they tell me that I have other matches of hers based on other people's trees. Now, when we come down, Anna has a son called Ernest William Enos, whatever you want to call him today. And we have matches through that. And those are primarily it's me, my brothers and sisters, and some other people, but I know all of those people. They are descended from my great-grandfather. But I also have a match from Anna's daughter, Elizabeth Miller, all right? And if there's a couple generations in between, and I have this person, and it says a half-great aunt and a half-third cousin. That's something goofy with Ancestry. They are not halves. It's because the information in her tree doesn't exactly match mine. But she is my 3rd cousin, and we share 73 centimorgans. So it's kind of interesting to see how these through lines work. And I can do a whole class on that. And afterwards, maybe if you and I can show you a little bit. Okay. They also try to make some suggestions on if I don't know who my 3rd great-grandfather is. They think maybe it might be Timothy and Mary, but they're not really sure. So I can click on it. And they say, well, you've got a relationship to this fellow. And, he says that Timothy is his 3rd great-grandfather. I'm like, yeah, I'm not too sure he came up with that, because we're getting back in Irish research. It's too far. It doesn't work as we go from there. But they tell me that I have various family trees that have that in there. But we all know we need to be careful with online trees, because one person does it and then other people copy it. So just quantity doesn't mean quality as we go through there. So it says Michael Gleason may be the son of Timothy. We'll go from there. So this through lines does give you some suggestions and says, well, you might want to think about this. You might want to think about that as you go through there. Now I told you, you can download your raw data from Ancestry to upload to other testing sites. So you go into that main DNA page and you had settings up in the top right corner. You click on that and you scroll down to test management, and you can download your raw data and you tell them you want to do that. And they are very emphatic. They come back to you with an email that says, what's your password? You understand that DNA is, once it's downloaded, it's not their problem anymore. You know, you don't get their security or anything else. And you understood it, that you assume all risk of storing, securing, and protecting my downloaded data. You know, we suggest sometimes you should just automatically download that and keep it, because what if Ancestry went out of business, or what if Family Tree went out of business, or something like that, and you couldn't get into it. So the suggestion is you do download your raw data and just store it somewhere permanently as you go through there. And then you download it. This is what my raw data looks like. I can actually open it up. It's just a text screen. On chromosome 1, and they give me the different positions, I have a T and a T. On the next position they tested, I have an A and a G. The next position they tested, it's a G and a G, which, you know, remember we said everything was A, G, C, T. And that's all they're looking at as we go through there. So that's my raw data. And then I can go over to Family Tree DNA, and I can upload it and put in my name. I have to create an account, which is no big deal. It's free. And then I can transfer my information from these other ones up to Family Tree DNA, and then see if somebody that tested at Family Tree DNA, I get a match. And Family Tree DNA has some tools to use that Ancestry doesn't have. Now, so I might have to pay $20 to have access as you go through there, but I can do that. One of the things they have is what it's called a chromosome browser. And what it does is it allows you to compare your chromosomes to other people. So I did my aunt, I did my sister, and I did somebody that I don't know who the heck he is. And so my aunt, what they show is, hers is the blue. My sister is the red, and it shows what I have in common with these people. And then this distant one is kind of the teal, blue, green in the bottom. So you notice that my sister and I, the red, we got a lot in common all the way through. We have some gaps on that, you know, there's some segments where we don't match as we go through. My aunt and I, we, you know, if you look at chromosome 2, my sister and my aunt, we are just spot on that very first part of it. And then the next part, my aunt doesn't match me, and that probably because I got it from my mother's side as opposed to my paternal aunt, and on down the line. So that lets you do it. Now, this is kind of esoteric. You may not care about this. So you don't want to get hung up about whether you have a chromosome browser or not. If you really get into DNA testing, you can do that, but I'm not sure that you really want to as you go through there, because it gets to be a little exciting as we go through there. You can upload to MyHeritage, same thing. They create an account, upload it. Okay. Now, GEDmatch is the interesting thing. GEDmatch is free. It's gedmatch.com. I gave it that to you. You log in and you can upload having downloaded your raw data from whoever you tested with, you can upload it to GEDmatch, and it's free. And then you can they have a chromosome browser. They have all sorts of things. It's like, are your parents related? How much Neanderthal do you have? So it's kind of interesting to see that. And they walk you through how to download from your testing company, and then how to upload it. It's very simple as you go through there. And then you get access to all sorts of things. You get a chromosome browser if you want to look at that. You can do some other interesting things with it that if you care about it, but you know, but the key is by going into GEDmatch, you have an opportunity perhaps to see people who have tested with 23andMe. If you tested with Ancestry and this person tested with 23andMe, never the twain shall meet. I mean, how are you going to know? But if you both upload to GEDmatch, then you have an opportunity to discover each other. And that's what GEDmatch is all about, is allowing you to hopefully make a connection with somebody who tested with a company that you did not test with. You can make it, as I said, you can turn off they automatically make you opt out of the police enforcement. But this is the one, GEDmatch is the one, and Family Tree DNA are the two that really the police have used to try to identify criminals. And we're not talking about, breaking and entering, burglary. We're talking about heinous crimes as you go through there. Okay. Oh, I'm done. Sorry about that. I'm going to stop sharing and see what you guys have for questions if you want to do that. That's a lot of territory. Now, one of the things I did tell you on that handout is, first of all, each one of the testing sites really has good information, and they walk you through what each one of them are. There are, if you go into youtube.com, there are all sorts of videos for people, for your testing site. So if you go into YouTube and you type in Ancestry DNA, you'll see Krista Cowan talking about it, or you'll tell some other people. Same thing with Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage. And they have very specific, they will walk you through it. They show you how it works, help you explain the tools that they have as you go through that. If you really want to know more just about DNA, there's the what do we call it? The International, I got to find this thing. International Society of Genetic Genealogy, ISOG. They have a wiki online, and it's very good. And they do explain some of the more detailed things about DNA as it's in itself. Go through there. For some of you that might have a subscription to Legacy Family Trees webinars, and it's relatively inexpensive, and they have webinars by really experts that go through this, and sometimes some of those are free. They're always free for the first week after it's done, and then they go into an archive, but sometimes even then an archive they're then. So there's always some place to go for more information. We have a DNA interest group that meets at the Iowa Genealogical Society. Right now we're doing it on Zoom. It is it's a benefit of membership. Although, if somebody want to join in and try it out for 1 or 2 and they're not a member, that's fine. But if you're going to continue to go, you need to do that. We meet on the first Tuesday evening of each month. And right now we're doing it via Zoom, and we will continue to do it via Zoom. We will probably get back to where we do a hybrid like you're doing right now, where you can come down to the library, or you can just do it online. So that works pretty well. So there's lots of places to go for more information. But if somebody's got some questions, I'm more than glad to answer them.
Folks, you are welcome to unmute yourselves and ask your question if you would like to, or you can put it in the chat. And for the folks with us in the auditorium, you can pass your question out to Clelia, our staff member there, and she'll make sure you get that read out as well.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how many have already tested. Or did anybody find something unusual when they tested? Although you may not want to share that with you. We had a woman who came to our group, and she goes, I have found 5 half siblings that I did not know. Some on her father's side and some on her mother's side. Her mother had children before she was married, had twice, and gave them up for adoption, or they were raised by other members of the family. And they're like, 5 half siblings, isn't? She says, I just shrug my shoulder and that's fine. Okay. It's a quiet group there. Nobody's talking. Not a group on there. No pictures. I don't see anybody. You turned off all their videos, or did they all go away?
I'm sure they're there.
Okay. Pete Peterson, have you tested yet? I'm just going to pick on you because you and I talked beforehand.
Yes.
Who'd you test with?
Ancestry.
A lot of Scandinavian?
Yes.
Okay.
like 75% or something like that.
Which is what you expected.
That's what I expected. I guess I just confirmed what I thought I already knew.
Mm-hmm. Were you able to make any connection with some distant cousins that you didn't know about?
Actually, yes. I found people up near where I grew up, and once we got talking, they were somebody that my family had visited when I was like 10 years old. And so I reconnected with that lady, which was kind of interesting. Ended up, we kind of knew each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. Didn't know you were related, but you'd forgotten.
I'd forgotten.
Okay. Looks like Mary, do you have something you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I do. My question is, can you suggest a way to contact people who come up as a match, but you can't exactly figure out where you fit together, and they may or may not have a tree? What's a tactful way to approach them without making them very defensive? And what's the best way to solicit a
and
response?
One of the problems is sometimes these are people who they just tested because they wanted to see their ethnicity, and they're not into genealogy. And so on all of these companies that you test with, like Ancestry, you can message the person and ask, try to start a conversation. What I generally do is I say that, I was reviewing my DNA matches. In general, I can identify through the shared matches that it's my father and my mother's side. So I'll say, I can see that we're related on my father's side. I just wasn't sure. And give them some information that that it's kind of like baiting the thing. Is like, here's the information. I'd be more than willing to share more information with you. Do you know anything about your family? And if you aren't into researching, we'd be delighted to help you. I don't often get a response, and quite frankly, if it's through Ancestry, they will tell you if you click on the person, the user, they will tell you how long it's been since they've logged in. And oftentimes you'll see they haven't logged in for over a year, which means they have lost interest in it. They got the information they wanted, and they're just not going to respond. But sometimes you do get a response, and it really helps as we go through there. But the idea is to offer them, to give them something of value, and then say, I'd be delighted to share more information. And then sometimes I give them my direct email address so that we don't have to go through Ancestry back and forth, but maybe they don't want to share their email address. But it all depends on what you're going to find as you go through there. And you can offer to do some research for them if they want to give you the basics, if they don't have a tree, if they want to give you a little bit basics. But some people are very, very concerned about that. They are not too excited about sharing information, and there's nothing, you can't force them to do it. So I don't know if anybody else has had success with that. It's hit or miss. I got another person standing in the room there.
That's our staff member.
That's your staff member. Okay. But I have managed to break down some brick walls. I was laughing about it. I got to think about this. My second great grandmother is a woman by the name of Bridget Gleason. I could never find where she and her husband were married in Ireland. I have all the children's baptism records, but I could never find the marriage record. And those Catholic Church records have been indexed and it's just not showing up. And I'm like, ugh. And then I started getting matches to the Gleasons, and they are from the parish of Silver Mines, which is right next door to the parish where my family lived. I'm like, really? So I bit the bullet and went back to the old style, and I started going through the online equivalent. It's almost like looking at microfilm, but I just was page after page going through it, because their firstborn son was born in 1843. I think that's right. And the marriage records for Silver Mines started in 1841. So I'm going, please, please don't get married before 1841. And all of a sudden I come across Andrew McCormick, which is my second great grandfather, marrying a Gleason, no first name given. All right. But I'm sitting there going, there's only 2 Andrew McCormicks in that entire area. And the other one is married to a Burke. So I'm like, I now know that my family, I'm sure that that's the marriage of my Andrew McCormick and Bridget Gleason. And she's from Silver Mines. The only problem is 50% of the people in the parish of Silver Mines are named Gleason. So I have no idea who her parents are. But at least the DNA took me back to Silver Mines and gave me some things to go with that. So I was pleased about that. Okay. Oh, we got something in the chat, and Catherine kind of came on. Catherine, do you have something? Yep. She's got her hand up. Yep. So go ahead and unmute yourself. There you go.
Well, I just wanted to say, my nephew just passed with cancer, 47 in Atlanta, but his father was there, and he's done some research as far as our heritage and on ancestry. And I thought about it, never done it, but it pushed me to do this. And when I saw your Zoom, I'm going to do that. But that would be from, I guess, both of our parents, but on my mother's side, we have a Familia Stammbuch from Germany that has been established and goes way back. And I'm still in contact with the secretary of the Familia Neuschafer in Germany. In fact, I just got an email from him last week.
Wow.
So lucky. Many of the archives, though, were broken when the churches were bombed, because that's where they lost a lot of the archives.
Yeah. So my suggestion is that you test with Ancestry, and then
I'm going to.
And take that information, your data, and upload it to MyHeritage, because they have a very strong German.
Very strong, yes. Well, both sides. My father came over from Germany when he was 5.
Yeah.
The other thing that's come to light is we believe there's Ashkenazi Jew heritage. So that just throws, I think, another curveball.
And that will show up. That will show up in your if it's depending on how distant it was, it will show up. It will say Ashkenazi Jewish as opposed to Sephardic. And
I don't think it was that far, because my sister, when she passed 4.5 years ago, and when she was getting chemo, one of the nurses said to her, "Do you have Ashkenazi Jew in your heritage?" And that was the first we'd ever really heard of it.
Yeah.
And the other thing then, that was in Michigan, and my daughter in Iowa did, she was doing makeup with some makeup artist or something for something special. And she said to her, from her facial features, "Do you have Ashkenazi Jew in your heritage?" So that we were talking about that just at my nephew's, gathering.
Yeah.
There's some trait that is coming through very strong.
But if it's distant, then you won't see it. One of the things I should have said is, if you're going to test, if you can get somebody you always want to test the most recent, the furthest relative you can. So if you've got parents that are alive or aunts or uncles that are alive, see if you can get them to test, because they're one generation back. Therefore, their DNA is not as diluted in terms of which side you're going to go through it. So I was, like I said, I was very fortunate. I got my 100-year-old aunt died to test. She died last year at 105. God love that woman.
My.
She's the oldest of all the children, of the 8 children. She died. So if you've got aunts or uncles, if you can talk them into doing it, I really would suggest that you want to give the, when I say oldest generation, I'm not talking about in terms of age, but I'm just talking about,
Right. I understand.
and that's it. So, and for the rest of you, if you could possibly do that, if you've tested and your husband's tested, testing your kids doesn't make any sense because you've already got 100% of your DNA
Right.
taken care of. But I have talked all my brothers and sisters into testing. So all 5 of us have tested. And because that way I have a better chance of making some connections as we go through there. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. There's something down in chat. What's it say here?
Yeah, my dad's grandmother was from Norway. My dad is 38% Norwegian, but I'm 46% Norwegian. Does this make sense?
Mama might have some Norwegian. You don't think about it, but you could have gotten some Norwegian from your mom's side. And I don't know if she tested on her mom's side, but that could very well be. Also, it also depends on have you checked? They update once a year, generally in about August. Ancestry updates your ethnicity estimates, and they change. Your DNA has not changed, but their reference panels have changed, and so they're taking your DNA and they're running it against their newest reference panels. So depending on if this person is using the most recent ethnicity estimates from both her and her father. But like I said, there's a chance that mom's got some DNA, because I've seen it where it comes out to be like the child has 1 more centimorgan or 2 more centimorgans than the parents. And that has to do with some rounding. It's, their algorithm does a little bit, you've got 6.3. And so they round down to 6, and some other person your father's got 6.2 for some reason, and they just round it down differently. So that would be interesting to know what's going on. But if this person, I just wonder if their mother's tested, and if that's true, then that might be it. Okay.
Great.
All right. Okay.
Right.
Julia?
Any other questions from anybody?
Okay. Okay.
Doesn't
If
seem like it.
and we have been known, if you, Mary Laura's got my email address. If you have if all of a sudden you bump into something, you've got a very specific question, you can email me, and I'll try to set you on the path of righteousness when it goes to the DNA. Go from there. Okay. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Teresa.
Thank you. It was fun to talk to all of you.
Wonderful.
Bye, Pete. Bye, everybody.